The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from The Commanding Self by Idries Shah. Section 3. Quality, quantity, and time. Consider the method of seasoning a certain dish. The pot is put on the fire together with some of the ingredients. Little by little, other items are added. As they cook, they release their substance and flavor, contributing to the total effect. In addition to this, certain spices are used. These condiments are not merely dumped into the stew, they are measured out and put into the pot at certain stages of the cooking. This sort of technique is familiar to all cooks. There is an additional technique, however, which is less familiar. This is it. An individual condiment is not all added at once. It is measured into several portions. Each portion is added at a different time. The result is that each portion of the same condiment is giving off a flavor slightly different in accordance with its stage of cooking. Such a condiment may therefore contain more than one flavor. It is working with subtleties of this rarefaction that distinguishes the prowess of the accomplished cook. Flavor. Question. Many of the things which Sufis say should be approached with caution or avoided altogether, except under special conditions, move me deeply. And many of these are things which people of all religions have used for centuries: music, invocations, rituals. Answer: this is precisely why some people in all religions have warned against mistaking excitement for spirituality. If you have to flavor 100 kilograms of ice cream, you will need 1/3 of its weight in real fruit juice. If you put less in, you will be adding goodness, but it will not be perceptible. If, however, you add instead synthetic flavoring, you will need only 1/3000th of the volume to produce the fruit flavor. Now decide. Do you want the easy way to get flavor with no nutritional value, or the flavor and the fruit content as well? The smallest pinch of the false fruit flavor will give the impression of fruit, and it is easily obtained. How many people, however, will say, "Why should I not have the synthetic, since it is so easily added?" Right and wrong study. Any subject, including that of the Sufis, may be studied or carried out by absolutely any method. The results obtained, however, will always depend upon how correct the method was. Equally, the understanding of these results depends upon sufficient knowledge to evaluate them. It is for these reasons that learning, both among the Sufis and in education and teaching in general, require expert guidance from outside, if that guidance does not exist inside the learner. Such guidance may be unfamiliar in form or associations, but it is never random. It mediates the manner, the time, the place, the company involved in the learning process and its applications to specific instances. There are 3 erroneous paths which have become associated with Sufism due to the ignorance of the matters just referred to. These are: 1. Scholastic study, which takes the literal for the figurative, or vice versa, which works selectively, using only some sources, which tries to organize through an unsuitable pattern, and so on. 2. Guruism, called in Persian piri muridi, producing a circus, running on the energy of crude emotion, imagined to be spirituality, and may either be self-deceived or spurious. 3. the morbidly religionist, characterized by a sad and depressing approach but excitatory movements, sometimes of a revivalist nature. Real Sufi study is based on design and measure. The design is perceived only by those who have the experience to know it. The measure is a consequence of this perception. Ignorance of the existence of the design and measure reality has caused all legitimate spiritual teachings to fall into the hands, in part at least, of the personality types which distort the teaching's outer shape into one of these three categories. Effectively, they are, all three of them, cults. Trust. Question: how can a person learn to trust? Answer: by overcoming stupidity through exercising the mind. Here is a tale to ponder. Alternative. There was once a man who fell over a cliff. His clothes caught on the branch of a tree which was growing on the cliff face. He hung there halfway down, in imminent danger of falling into a river foaming far below. The man looked up to the heavens and called out in his fear, "Is there anyone up there?" A voice immediately answered, "What do you want?" He replied, "Tell me what to do." The voice said, "Let go and fall." The man thought for a moment, looked down again, and then cried heavenwards, "Is there anyone else up there?" At that point, the tree's roots separated themselves from the earth. Eyebrows. A man looked at his wife's face and said, "When did one of your eyebrows become thinner than the other?" She answered, "It was first noticed when you started to look at my exterior and became less appreciative of the inner me." So runs the Sufi tale. It continues, "So too, when the potential seeker asks how he can trust a master, he is approaching matters superficially. If he could discern inner worth, he would not, of course, need to ask the question. But as he cannot understand, the only answer to him is, there is no answer for you." Inconsequential. Question: I went to see a Sufi and he spoke only a few inconsequential words to me. How can I respect such a person, as we are supposed to respect teachers? I have even heard of a Sufi who made an appointment to see someone and then said nothing to him at all. I have, moreover, read of Sufis who spent their time chaffing their companions and gave out no teachings at all. Answer: it is all a matter of perspective. Have you considered whether you were wrong and he was right? I suppose not, from your question. So let me just give you a small analogy from my own experience. I was once on a journey, and I saw before me, at a great distance, a hill which was all that stood between me and my final destination. I estimated that it would not take me very long to climb the hill, and so I did not take much in the way of provisions. But when I had gone forward for some miles, I realized that this inconsequential hill was in fact a very high mountain. Not only was it a barrier, but I could not climb it at all. That which appears inconsequential to you, even a few words, from where you are, may be of the greatest possible importance, like a mountain. If you take this into consideration by giving attention to your teacher, you will have thereby the provisions. And unlike me, you will also find that you can traverse the mountain. When you get to the top, furthermore, you will be able to see your destination. And looking back from the peak, you will see the reality of what you have traversed. You will then understand both what is behind and what is before. This is the reality of the Sufi way. Value for money. A man went to a Sufi master and complained that, although he felt that he was getting some spiritual guidance from his current teacher, he would like something more attractive than the form of instruction which he was receiving. The master allowed him to join his community for a time and put him through such severe exercises that he could not stand them and returned to his original mentor. One of the master's disciples said, "I am sure that if this newcomer had been treated more gently at first, he would have accustomed himself to hardship and would not have been lost to the community." The master called the disciples together and told them, "Once upon a time there was a judge who used to insist on being given a bribe before he would hear a case or even sign a document. The people resented him, but since he had been appointed by higher authority, there was nothing that they could do. When the judge died, his son was given his position. He, in turn, forced people to pay him money whether there was a case or not, or whether there was a paper to sign or not. Before long, the people were praying for the return of their dead and formerly reviled judge. At least, they said, he used to leave us alone and give us some justice." The disciple who was returned to his former mentor had to have experiences which would allow him to value the teaching which he was in fact receiving, which was all that was indicated for him for the time being. I was the means of applying that lesson. Bombardment. When someone's self-esteem is linked to his spiritual search, he can achieve very little until he has seen that this is a wrong connection. Generally, of course, people are unaware that they pride themselves on being serious travellers on the way, or whatever they call it. They more often imagine that they are humble, but this humility is quite often easily exposed as an unwitting cloak for a sense of personal importance. A young man came to see me. He had read many books on spiritual matters, but felt that his faith in the path was faltering. He wanted me to restore it and to be his teacher. This sort of approach, more often than not today, as with the Sufi records of the past, is found to be a demand for attention, not knowledge. I asked him if an allegory of his history, present state, and desires would suit him. He brightened up and said something like, "I had not dared to hope that you would give me anything as comprehensive as that." Now, I wanted to demonstrate whether he meant by comprehensive only flattery. So I told him the following anecdote. A young soldier was sheltering from a bombardment in a trench. He suddenly noticed his old recruiting officer beside him. The young man said, "Do you remember how you told me when I was a potential recruit about the pleasures of army life, and how if I joined I would avoid the horrors of civilian automatism?" "Yes," said the recruiter. "Well," continued the youth, "would you please tell me again, as I find that my enthusiasm is weakening?" My visitor, who had originally written pleading for an interview and pledging total and eternal acceptance of anything that I might say, now became quite annoyed. Stolen property. Question. Some people give knowledge free. Why should others charge for it? Answer. That which is given free is never knowledge. It may be information, or it may be something with which one can work, but knowledge does not come in that manner. What does come in that way, however, is something which can never be your own. There is a saying which implies this. If a man has stolen a herd of horses, why should he not sell them for a penny each? You have to know that something valued at even a penny or less may not be your property, and may never become such. The 5 Animals. After quite a number of adventures, 5 animals came together one day on a highway. Each discovered that all the others had a single belief and a single aim. In short, the cock, the dog, the donkey, the cat, and the monkey were all convinced that he or she had a beautiful voice, and moreover, which was not appreciated. Every one of them had thus separately set out to find this appreciation. Not unnaturally, they decided to continue their journey together. First of all, they came to a village. The monkey set off, mounted on the dog, to see what the villagers were like. "It is no use our looking for appreciation here," he reported on his return, "for as soon as they saw us, the ignorant peasants fled in all directions, saying that the devil had arrived, mounted on one of the fiends of hell." They therefore avoided this village and approached the next one. This time the white cock, with all his beautiful plumage, wandered into the village on the donkey's back, crowing a little to test the effect of his voice on the people. To this sound the ass could not help adding some of his own melodious notes. At this unusual sight the people crowded around, at first unable to fathom the meaning of the demonstration. Then suddenly some bumpkin cried, "These are supernatural creatures. The white cock is a saint, and the donkey is his faithful disciple. Honor them, and they will bring us peace and plenty." So intense was the emotion of the crowd as they sought help and healing, riches and satisfactions of all kinds, that the bird and the quadruped turned tail and fled. "It is no use," they reported. "Nobody wants to hear our voices. They only want us to hear theirs." Well, the group of creatures, having decided that this village was not the one for them, continued along the road until darkness began to fall. They decided to shelter in some woods and to start off again the next morning. The dog and the donkey lay down at the foot of the tree, and the cock floated up to roost on its lower branches. The cat and the monkey, being more inquisitive, climbed right to the top. Suddenly, the cat, wakeful as nocturnal creatures are, saw a bright light not far off. He roused the others. "There may be food near that light, for people cook by flames. Let us go and investigate. Besides, there may be someone there who realizes the value of our beautiful voices." Thus it was that the group found themselves, not many minutes later, in a clearing in the woods, where lights were showing through the windows of a cottage. They crept forward. The monkey sat on the donkey's back, and the cock perched on his head so that they could see through the window. Now it so happened that the owners of the house were away, and a party of robbers had broken in and were regaling themselves with the food and drink which they found there. At the sight of the revelry, and hearing the discordant singing of the thieves, the cock let out a cry of surprise. Hearing this, the robbers looked at the window. To their horror, they thought that they saw a gigantic cock with a monkey's face on his breast. Screaming and howling with alarm, the miscreants fled into the night, and the animals took over the house. When they had eaten, the animals settled down in the ground floor room, happy to be fed and warm. But the thieves, after their first headlong flight, began to wonder whether they had imagined what had happened. They crept back to the cottage and went in through the door. They saw nothing at first, so the first thief struck a light to find a candle. Immediately the light was reflected in the eyes of the cat, sitting high up on the warm mantelpiece. The thief sprang back in alarm, and he was kicked by the donkey, who was sprawled on the floor. This disturbed the monkey, who spat at the other thieves, while the cock pecked them and the dog growled. Once more the thieves took to their heels. Piecing together their experiences later, they decided that the house was inhabited by an immense demon with fur and feathers, glowing eyes and a hideous growl which could bite, scratch, and kick. they still believe that this is how things are in the cottage. In fact, it is said they have a way of thinking about things which is very similar to the way in which people imagine this world to be. Your share and mine. The Sufi teacher Anwar Abbasi was asked, "What was it that put you on the road to knowledge?" He answered, "I had spent many years looking for a teaching and a teacher. I found something to which to object in each one until I despaired of ever reaching my goal. Ultimately, I reached the house of a certain Sufi whose actions seemed to accord with his words, and whose followers impressed me very much. For some time I felt that this was where I should be. Then, unfortunately, a demand was made upon me for money, and I thought to myself, men of wisdom do not charge for knowledge. And I left the place that very day, without, however, mentioning my reasons to anyone there. That evening I shared my evening meal with an old dervish whom I met by the wayside. I had not conveyed any of my thoughts to him, but he sufficiently perceived them, for he said, "When you give money, do you seek to donate your valuation of what is to be received, or do you give what you think you can spare? Perhaps, on the other hand, you find reasons for not giving at all, imagining that you are virtuous at the same time." I was so shocked by this, by seeing so suddenly that my attitude was only a mask for stinginess, that I returned to my last teacher. As soon as he saw me, he smiled and said, "Those who say that one should not charge money for knowledge cannot receive it even as a gift. This is because one can learn only after the matter of charging or not charging, the mentality of the world, has been expelled from the mind so that wisdom may take its place. There is no room for both 'I do not want to pay' and also 'I want to learn' in one and the same person. To deflect a greedy person or to show him his shallowness, we always ask for money." Arguing with gifts. The ways of learning, the knowledge of the nature and needs of learners, and all other things which are possessed and made available by Sufis, are known by them as gifts. These therefore are things given, which can be of use to the recipient. When people ask for guidance or teaching, they are in this sense asking for gifts. But, as with more material gifts, they cannot stipulate the nature, extent, and timing of their bestowal. Gifts are not only given, but they can be given only within the framework which governs gifts of this kind. This conception of bestowals of capacity and of their reception and employment is very helpful in understanding that one cannot bargain with someone who has gifts to give, that one may not appreciate their worth unless one is shown what they are or how to use them, that one does not really, for the most part, apply for gifts to be given. Ants. Question. Lots of people are giving lectures, running groups, and enrolling disciples all over the world in the name of Sufism. How can we tell whether they are Sufis or not? I am sure that most of them are not, from what I have seen of some of them. Answer. Here is a report from the press. The American crazy ant has arrived in Britain. Correctly named the long-legged ant, this creature was first identified in the United Kingdom in a Preston psychiatric hospital. Was this deliberate? Did the crazy ants head straight for the psychiatric hospital when they climbed off their jumbo jet? I would say that they found themselves there, or near to the hospital, and settled in because there was something, perhaps the central heating, which they found congenial. Similarly, people who think that there is something in the Sufi way which corresponds with their ideas will adopt it. They will settle down by enrolling as disciples, and so on. How can one tell, you ask, and then you answer it? You are sure that most of them are not Sufis. How do you tell? By using common sense. There is always something odd and unacceptable about these adopters, even if it takes some time to be noticed. The formula is to use common sense before the ants take it away from you. True and false teachers. Since there are so many people all over the world claiming that they are spiritual teachers, many of those who want to follow them, and those who want to refute them, spend much time trying to work out which are real ones and which are not. What is rather remarkable is that a great many of these self-styled teachers are discernibly not teachers, if studied with the normal rational apparatus which is of some value even to seekers after truth. There is a story about a man who went up to another one who was selling what he described as the most delicious and irreplaceable honey in the world in a marketplace. "If it is so marvelous," he asked, "why are you selling it?" "I wouldn't try, you may be sure," answered the honey seller, "if a mouse hadn't fallen into it." Now, in spiritual matters, it may be claimed that the seeker, however sincere, cannot tell whether there is a mouse in the honey of the teaching which he is offered. But if he would only steel himself to look at the honey with dead mice floating on top, he would start to learn how to recognize the real thing. If you can test a verifiable counterfeit, you will eventually find a coin which is gold. Those who start at the other end, who can test gold without being confused by counterfeits, are a different lot of people, sad to say. Finding a teacher. Question: is a teacher absolutely necessary in the Sufi way? Answer: yes. For practical purposes, absolutely necessary. Question: how should people seek teachers? Answer: by fitting themselves for the search, by familiarizing themselves with the materials which a teacher provides for primary studies, then by approaching a teacher and asking whether one can become a pupil. Question: but is that not what people always do? Answer: very far from it. They do not bother to think whether they have taken the trouble to absorb what a teacher may have provided, preferring to look for a teacher and to put all the onus upon him to teach them. This attitude debars them from learning because the assumption is based on the vanity which the preliminary familiarization is designed to help to reduce. Question: where exactly is the vanity in just looking for a teacher? Answer: it lies in believing that one can and should be taught direct by the teacher without taking the necessary preliminary step of getting to know his work on the primary level. How to tell. Question: how do you tell a genuine Sufi from someone who is only pretending to be one? Answer: there is a Roman Catholic anecdote about a certain gentleman in the Philippines who, introduced to the Pope, said, "Are you a Catholic? I am too." According to my informant, someone who could think and talk like that could not really be a Catholic. Among Sufis, certainly you may be sure that those who call themselves Sufi are not such at all. Sufis are recognized by other Sufis. But there is a capacity to perceive truth and deception. This is enough for those who want to learn. This capacity is not developed, it is inbuilt. It can be overlaid by cant and bias. Therefore, the first step is to deal with these things, to liberate oneself. There is a story current in England about 6 men waiting in an anteroom at Buckingham Palace to be received by the Queen. 3 were white, 1 was yellow, another black, and the last was brown. An equerry came in and said, "The distinguished guests will now follow me." The 3 Englishmen stood up and started for the door. The courtier stopped them, saying, "No, I mean these gentlemen, His Highness, His Eminence, and His Excellency." The yellow, black, and brown men trooped out of the room. The 3 Englishmen looked at one another, and one said, "Whose country is it anyway?" Imitators. I have had endless difficulties with people, both men and women, who purport to give out my teachings but get everything wrong. In desperation, I asked a man and a woman who were terrible offenders to come to see me and told them that they were just indulging themselves and were misleading people. I objected to their exploiting people, to their random collection of students, to their teaching when they understood nothing, to using the wrong materials with the wrong people, and so on. They listened carefully to everything that I said, and then carried on exactly as before, with one difference. The difference is that they now claim to be personally instructed by Idries Shah. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.